Before the first mournful toll of the chapel bell had faded, Steffi Forrester, Finnegan, her hand pressed always to the curve of the child she carried, made the heart-wrenching decision to step away from the stage that had defined her life for as long as she could remember. The Forrester Creations runway shows, the thunderous applause after each reveal, the harsh glare of flashbulbs. Everything that once energized her now felt hollow, a cruel reminder of the husband she had lost and the father her unborn child would never know. Finn's death had come without warning. One moment he was there, reciting lines from a childhood poem to the tiny life stirring within her. The next he was gone, felled by a freak accident on a remote runway during a humanitarian mission. As the news rippled through Los Angeles, Steffi's grief became a storm that no board meeting, no designer's sketchbook, could withstand. With her body already weary from pregnancy, her spirit broke under the weight of funeral arrangements and the expectations of a legacy-driven family. So she withdrew from the glittering corridors of Spencer Publications, from the marble floors of the Forrester offices, from the very heartbeat of the fashion empire she'd helped build. She returned to her mother's ancestral home in Scotland, a wind-lashed manor perched on cliffs above an unforgiving sea, where ancient stones held the echoes of generations of Forrester women who had known heartache and had endured. There, in the quiet hush of tartan-draped halls, Steffi would rest and prepare to bury the man she loved more fiercely than any runway spotlight could ever illuminate. Almost as soon as her private jet vanished into the low-hanging clouds, the world she abandoned refused to pause. At Forrester Creations, the sudden void in leadership sent shockwaves through every department. Executive Vice President Liam Spencer, still recovering from his own brush with mortality, stepped forward to fill Steffi's seat, but found himself torn between honoring her creative vision and asserting his own voice. A delicate balancing act he could not sustain indefinitely. Ridge Forrester, co-founder and patriarch, attempted to rally the design teams around established protocols, yet each decision felt fraught without Steffi's instinctive eye for innovation. Brooke Logan, newly appointed to a strategic advisory role, saw in Steffi's absence a chance to resurrect her own influence over the company's direction, pushing proposals that prioritized mass-market appeal over couture craftsmanship. Meanwhile, Hope Logan, ever hopeful for a lasting legacy of her own, lobbied for digital expansion and social media partnerships, challenging the old guard emphasis on atelier exclusivity. In the background, Thomas Forrester, whose own designs had long been overshadowed by his sister's brilliance, smiled at the prospect of stepping out of her shadow, convincing Deacon Sharp to partner on a provocative new line that would dare to blend runway glamour with streetwear sensibilities. But none of these well-funded ambitions moved as swiftly as the whisper of opportunity carried on the undercurrents of corporate espionage. Sheila Carter, recently released from the mental health facility where she'd spent time after her last showdown with the Forresters, sensed the perfect moment to strike. Under the pretense of goodwill, she offered to broker key client relationships on behalf of Forrester Creations, citing her extensive network in Europe and the Middle East. Quinn Fuller, whose alliances had grown as mercenary as her ambitions, secretly met with Sheila in a nondescript hotel suite, exchanging intel that could undermine Brooke's proposed marketing campaigns and bolster Thomas's streetwear proposals. At the same time, Paris Buckingham, market director for the European division, quietly plotted to leverage her position into a creative partnership that would effectively dilute the Forrester name with her own aristocratic cachet. By the time Deacon's new street line debuted in a gala held at the Griffith Observatory, an event that drew industry press but polarized the design community, the seeds of rebellion had sprouted into a tangled briar patch of competing loyalties. Within those same halls, undisguised opportunism cracked the veneer of collaboration. Rick Forrester, Crown Prince of Spencer Publications by virtue of his lineage, made clandestine overtures to Zend Forrester Dominguez, whom he'd once viewed as a peripheral player. Together, they envisioned a digital showroom that would bypass traditional runways altogether, selling directly to consumers through virtual reality experiences. They pitched their idea to Bill Spencer and hoped to secure funding in exchange for a slice of Forrester Creations' intellectual property. Bill, always eager to expand his media empire's cross-platform synergies, listened attentively, envisioning a future where Hollywood stars modeled virtual garments in live holographic broadcasts, and where his grandchildren might inherit both a publishing and fashion dynasty. Yet in doing so, he unwittingly threatened to fracture the uneasy détente between Forrester and Spencer Holdings, pitting Ridge's couture purists against Liam's new media evangelists and dredging up every past grievance between generations of industry titans. Back in Scotland, Steffi, her gown now simple and shawl-clad, pored over the letters of condolence she received by the boxful. Inked regrets from clients, heartfelt pleas from friends, and the occasional terse demand from board members insisting that her absence not compromise quarterly forecasts. By day, she walked the windswept cliffs with her mother, absorbing the salt breeze and the rocky landscape that reminded her life could persist beyond grief. By night, she met with her personal counsel over video calls. Finn's parents, who survived him only in spirit, and her lawyer, who promised to safeguard her creative rights and ensure her unborn child's future. Each call was a razor's edge between heartbreak and duty. She longed to surrender every document, every contract, and every final stitch to Ridge, to Liam, to anyone who would shoulder the burden she could no longer bear. Yet the sight of the tiny heartbeat on her latest ultrasound refused to let her relinquish control completely. She was a Forrester by blood, by marriage, and by the inventive fire that had forged her designs into legend. Her absence, though necessary, could not be total. And so, as the funeral pyre for Finn was lit on a storm-darkened Scottish moor, Steffi stood at the threshold of her final performance, an intimate farewell witnessed only by a gathering of immediate family and a small circle of true friends. Under a granite cross carved with his name, she laid a single white rose upon the pyre, its petals catching the flicker of flames that consumed the coffin. The wind carried away her whispered prayers, for her husband's peace, for her child's safety, and for her own fractured spirit. When the last ember died, and the tears she had resisted crashed down in torrents, she returned to the manor with her mother and sisters, determined to rest in solitude until the first hint of spring. Or until Forrester Creations sent word that they could no longer hold the lines of power in her stead. Across the ocean, with Steffi's signals still unbroken but her presence absent, the true test of loyalties began. Ridge, wrestling with guilt over his part in Finn's death by approving the dangerous runway itinerary, considered resigning from his executive role to join Steffi in Scotland, only to have Brooke dissuade him with remorse-laden memories of their shared past and promises of a future yet unwritten. Liam, racked by fresh pangs of survivor's guilt, attempted to unite the factions at a hastily convened meeting in the Forrester boardroom, but found every proposal contested by hidden agendas. Hope, who had stepped into the breach as interim creative director, faced sabotage from offices she once considered friends. Her mood boards vanished, her conference calls dropped, and her own son's birth announcement loomed as a personal victory tainted by corporate warfare. Even Quinn's devious machinations backfired when Sheila clandestinely recorded their collusion and threatened to expose it to the press, elevating the threat of scandal over the promise of profit. By the time the European collection previewed in Paris, its grand salon echoing with the applause of critics who still revered the Forrester name. No single leader could claim unquestioned authority. The runway glowed with silhouettes that borrowed from Steffi's signature lines, but borrowed also from Thomas's street sensibility, Brooke's commercial flair, and Paris's aristocratic embellishments. As the final model swept down the runway, wearing a jacket emblazoned with a stylized thistle encircled by a double helix motif, a tribute no one realized was secretly Steffi's last unpublished sketch. The audience erupted in acclaim that felt both exhilarating and hollow. The applause masked the undercurrents of betrayal, ambition, and wary alliances that now defined the once unified House of Forrester. And so the stage is set for a war waged in boardrooms, supplier contracts, and whispered conversations in shadowed hallways, where every seamstress, every pattern maker, and every designer will be forced to choose a side. Steffi, far from the fierce heartbeat of Los Angeles, watches the gale-beaten waves crash against Scottish cliffs and wonders whether her child will one day inherit a company shaped by compromise or by the uncompromising spirit of the woman whose absence changed everything. In the empty halls of her childhood home, she finally allows herself to rest, to dream of a future where her child grows in a world at peace. While knowing that the only way to secure that peace may be to return, to take up the mantle she abandoned, and to fight for the legacy that has always been hers, the Forrester name. In Steffi Forrester's absence, the halls of Forrester Creations echoed with an uneasy hush, as though half the company's heartbeat had been carried away with her to the windswept cliffs of Scotland. Yet where one force receded, another surged. Ridge Forrester, his brow furrowed with equal measures of grief and resolve, answered the void not with submission, but with determination. Months earlier he had recoiled from the memory of Brooke Logan's betrayals, yet in the months since Finn's tragic death and Steffi's departure, he found himself circling back to the woman who had once been the center of his world. Brooke, her own heart battered by the loss of her daughter, though years and secrets had obscured the truth of Beth's fate. Saw in Ridge's hesitation an opportunity. The Crown Prince of Couture might yet reclaim his throne beside her. Their clandestine meetings began in the executive suites of Spencer Publications, where Bill Spencer's own empire lay under siege from Hope's digital ambitions. Ridge and Brooke, drawing on shared history and rekindled passion, crafted a blueprint they called the Royal Alliance. A pact to wrest control of Forrester Creations away from Eric, who lay weakened by illness and retreating further into his library of memories and regrets. Bill, sensing a chance to shore up his own position, whispered encouragement, while Ridge drafted speeches invoking tradition, heritage, and the promise of a new golden age under his and Brooke's joint stewardship. The boardroom buzzed with speculation. Could Ridge and Brooke bridge their tormented past and lead the House of Forrester into a triumphant future? Meanwhile, Taylor Hayes, who had returned from Europe to lend her professional expertise to Steffi's unborn child's cause, watched these maneuvers with a growing sense of dread. Ridge and Brooke's renewed intimacy had sparked rumors in the design loft. Stolen glances at late-night photo shoots, Brooke's voice on Ridge's phone during corporate briefings, Ridge's laughter echoing from locations where Taylor once counseled him out of grief. Taylor, whose devotion to Ridge had never fully waned even as she nurtured her new documentary project for Spencer, resolved that if Brooke sought to seize Forrester through the back door, she would expose her duplicity, and she had just the weapon to do it. Late one night, combing through SEC filings at the request of a Cardiff-based financial contact, Taylor discovered an intricate web of shell corporations tied to Logan Enterprises and an untraceable Cayman subsidiary. Buried deep in the paper trail was a purchase order. Brooke Logan's personal funds had quietly acquired 18% of Forrester Creations' outstanding shares 2 weeks before Eric's health scare had become public knowledge. That transaction, fraudulent by SEC rules and bordering on insider trading, gave Brooke not only financial leverage, but the legal means to challenge Eric's stewardship. Taylor's pulse thundered as she printed the dossier and forwarded a detailed report to the Securities and Exchange Commission with a terse cover letter, possible violation of securities law by Brooke Logan against Forrester Creations. Please investigate. By morning, the halls of Forrester were alive with whispers of subpoenas, sealed warrants, and the looming threat of audits. Ridge, buoyed by his alliance with Brooke, strode into Eric's office to claim the CEO seat, only to find the patriarch pale and resolute against the approaching storm. "Ridge," Eric said, voice failing but eyes still bright, "I know what you're doing, and I know what she's done. We cannot hand over this company to that." Ridge's jaw tightened as Brooke appeared in the doorway, radiant in designer black yet shadowed by the whisper of scandal. Before he could reply, a knock at the door heralded the arrival of the chairman of the Forrester board, missive in hand. "We've been served with an SEC inquiry. The matter concerns Ms. Logan." In that instant, Ridge felt the fulcrum shift beneath his feet, his royal alliance teetering on the brink of exposure and collapse. The design room, once a sanctuary of creativity, became a war zone of shifting alliances and whispered confrontations. R.J. Forrester, young scion of the Forrester line and Steffi's confidant in every design critique, found himself caught in the crossfire. At his drafting table, he overheard Roscoe confronting Emma, the new head of marketing. "Are you with Brooke or Taylor? Are we designing for a scandal or for a comeback?" Emma shot back that she answered to Ridge and the bank account behind him, while Marcus, head of public relations, muttered that every press release now required legal clearance. RJ's phone buzzed with texts from Thomas staking claim to the loft. "Need your CD files for a streetwear capsule." Then Taylor's message, "We meet in my office at noon." Big news. Then Brooks, "Ridge, and I need you to help design the CEO launch gown." As deadline pressure mounted and sketches lay abandoned amid dueling directives, RJ realized that his loyalty would define not just his career but the future of Forrester Creations itself. At high noon, Taylor presented her evidence to a gathering of board members in the conference room, printed share certificates, bank statements, correspondence between Brooks' shell company and the brokerage firm. Cameras from The Spectator, alerted by SEC filings, filled the room with flash and frame. Brooke, her composure flickering only briefly, denied the charges, yet her denial rang hollow against the mountain of paper Taylor laid bare. Ridge, torn between the woman he had pledged to restore and the mother of his child's half-sister's best friend, found no words as Eric, summoned to stand, declared that such betrayal could not go unanswered. The board voted to suspend Brooks' advisory role pending investigation and to install Ridge as interim CEO. Only if he pledged to revoke any benefits she might claim under the alliance. Brooks stormed from the room, her exclamation of "You'll rue this, Ridge," echoing down the hallway. Ridge remained, shoulders bowed beneath the weight of victory and defeat, while Taylor placed a consoling hand on his arm. In the design loft, RJ held the final fate of Forrester in his pencil as two armies clamored. Brooks' loyalists demanding he complete her launch gown, Taylor's supporters beckoning him to join the documentary campaign celebrating Ridge's return. Poised between his mother's legacy and his father's ambition, between love and duty, between scandal and redemption, R.J. Forrester realized that the battlefield had moved from Parisian runways to corporate boardrooms, where every sketch, every signature, and every share could become a weapon in a war shaped by power, passion, and the unrelenting pursuit of legacy. And as the crescendo of conflict reverberated through the very fabric of Forrester Creations, One question hung in the air like the suspended breath of a broken promise. In a world torn by ambition and betrayal, who would lay the final pattern? And who would tear it apart?